Singapore's solar power has passed 1.6 gigawatts, but as rooftop adoption rises, so does the challenge of managing excess energy. The push now is to balance growth with grid reliability. Joining us is Karambir Anand from YCP. Karambir, what's driving Singapore's rapid growth in solar capacity?
From our perspective, really, it's three things that are driving the increase in solar capacity. Number one is government policies. So the government has set a target of 2 gigawatts by 2030. As you mentioned, we're already at 1.6, so the 2 gigawatts certainly looks achievable. A lot of government agencies like the HDB with their Solar Nova program, the PUB with their Solar on Reservoirs program, etc., are really doing their part to make this happen. The second is fundamentally economics. When you look at the cost of solar panels, it's gone down by 80 to 90% just in the last decade. And now production costs are viable even without heavy subsidies. The third is basically corporate action. So when you look at a lot of the data centers, a lot of the tech companies in particular, they have their own decarb goals. And they are the ones who are now signing long-term power purchase agreements to put in place for multi-decade long periods where they're driving a lot of the uptick. And to match that demand, there is a number of REITs and industrial buildings that are now coming together to get that solar capacity up and running.
Now, Karambir, why is solar curtailment becoming a growing concern?
Yeah, so solar curtailment in Singapore is becoming a concern because our grid historically has been optimized for steady state gas fired generation, not for a sharp midday spike in solar output. If you look at the last 5 years, the proportion of gas in the energy mix has essentially gone from 88% to about 83%. And at the same time, solar has gone from 4 to 10%. So as solar generation expands, supply can sometimes exceed daytime demand, especially on weekends and holidays when consumption is lower. Without enough flexible demand, storage, or export options, the grid operator will have to curtail production to maintain grid stability. So even though the total penetration for solar right now is still modest by global standards, the local concentration and lack of flexibility make curtailment a growing technical and commercial issue. But I did want to say that we are not alone facing this issue. So when you look at Australia, for example, out of the approximately 11 million households, over 4 million households in Australia today have solar panels. And they have exactly the same issue, which is that now the midday supply exceeds demand. So there is now a consideration in Australia to mandate energy groups to offer free daytime electricity for 3 hours starting in July 2026. So just to make sure that we understand this is not an issue that we alone are facing, others are facing it too, and we can learn from them.
Also, how serious is the mismatch between midday supply and demand?
So the mismatch between midday supply and demand is actually becoming more noticeable every year, and it's becoming an operational challenge. Essentially, during the lunchtime, we have an abundance of cheap solar, but in the early evening, as the sun sets, the demand spikes for cooling and lighting, and that's when the gas plants have to ramp up quite quickly. These ramping cycles are costly and stressful for the equipment. And at the same time, our industrial demand is fairly flat, so we don't have enough flexible loads to absorb the midday surplus. So while the mismatch, I would say, is not a crisis yet, it's a real operational issue that will intensify as solar climbs towards and beyond the 2 gigawatt mark. And managing this impact imbalance is one of the key tasks for the next phase of the energy transition.
Can you also share with us what policy or market changes could encourage better solar integration?
No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. Going forward, it's not about solar deployment, which is just getting the panels in place. It's really about solar integration. And so we can do a number of things. We can have dynamic time of use pricing, which is basically establishing a tariff that aligns the consumption with the solar generation peaks. We can have the behavioral changes in place that incentivize more midday energy use. We can also have demand response programs, not only on the supply side, but more on the demand side, which basically we get the industrial users, the SMEs, the aggregated small users, and have systems in place that provide rapid and verifiable load reductions during the grid stress. And lastly, we can also put in place energy storage systems. Now, this can be deployed across industrial, commercial, residential sites to make sure that we capture the surplus power during the day and release it later on, reducing curtailment and stabilizing the grid.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Karambir.
Thank you for having me.
Again, that was Karambir Anand, Managing Partner and Southeast Asia Regional Manager at YCP. For more news, please visit sbr.com.sg.